Hello everyone, and welcome to the Complex Cinema channel. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and give us a like. Today, we are going to discuss the movie Akhiri Cinta, Tahun, nonton online. The screen flickers, drawing us into the familiar, yet subtly shifting world of a long-term commitment fraying at the edges. We meet a couple whose 7 years together feel less like a sturdy foundation and more like a well-worn carpet hiding stains they'd rather not acknowledge. There's a palpable sense of routine, that comfortable cage where passion once resided but has since been replaced by the quiet choreography of shared domesticity. The narrative often circles back to their individual pursuits, hinting at the divergent paths they've been unconsciously walking. One character, perhaps steeped in a demanding creative field, maybe architecture or graphic design, something requiring both meticulous detail and bursts of unpredictable inspiration, finds their energy increasingly channeled away from the partnership. Their professional drive, once a source of pride to their partner, now acts as a silent wedge. You can see it in the late nights illuminated by a screen, the quick, distracted kisses. Contrast this with the other's journey. Maybe they are navigating the more emotionally taxing world of education, or perhaps even something entrepreneurial, where the pressure to succeed weighs heavily on their internal landscape. Their moments of vulnerability seem to bounce off the other's preoccupied shield. It's a classic cinematic portrayal of two people occupying the same space, but existing in separate emotional timelines. The crux of the tension arrives, as it often does, not in a dramatic explosion, but through a slow, painful recognition of emotional distance. Perhaps an external figure enters the periphery, not necessarily a rival for affection, but someone who sees one of the main characters with fresh, undistracted eyes, mirroring the attention the partner used to give. This external presence acts less as a catalyst and more as a mirror, forcing the protagonists to confront the reality of what they've lost in their pursuit of stability or career goals. There are flashbacks woven in, brief, sun-drenched glimpses of their early romance, the ambitious plans made over cheap coffee, the shared dreams that felt so achievable then. These memories serve as painful counterpoints to the present stasis. We witness the evolution, or perhaps the devolution, of their communication style, moving from eager sharing to terse summaries of the day. The film excels in capturing the small, almost imperceptible betrayals of neglect. The forgotten anniversary celebrated with a rushed, impersonal gift. The shared hobby dropped because one person simply stopped asking the other to join. These details accumulate, heavy and undeniable. The eventual reckoning isn't clean. It's messy, filled with regret for opportunities missed and words left unsaid during the years when they were still fundamentally aligned. The ending, without offering a neat bow, suggests a necessary, painful shedding. Whether they truly find their way back to each other, or simply find a better, more honest way to let go. The journey is about excavating 7 years of shared history to see what, if anything, is worth salvaging. It's a meditation on the quiet cost of growing up within a relationship designed for people they no longer are. The narrative delves deeper into the texture of their shared existence, revealing the small, almost ritualistic ways they've constructed their separate realities. Imagine one, let's call him Reza, whose career perhaps involves the precise, analytical world of software development, a field demanding absolute focus, which he now carries home like a lead weight. His inspiration, once sparked by shared intellectual curiosity with his partner, Sarah, now comes from abstract problem-solving unrelated to their life. When Sarah tries to talk about her day, maybe she's a high school history teacher, constantly wrestling with the messy, unpredictable nature of human development. Reza's responses are often clipped, his eyes flickering back to the phone or the latest update on his project. He misses the spark in her eye when she talks about a breakthrough with a difficult student, a spark he used to ignite with genuine interest. Sarah, on the other hand, carries the emotional burden of the stagnant atmosphere. Her desire for connection isn't just about grand gestures, it's about the quality of presence. She remembers the early days when Reza, fresh out of university and buzzing with the ambition of building his first successful app, would eagerly sketch out future plans on napkins, and she, inspired by her own youthful idealism, would annotate them with ideas for their shared home life. Now their arguments feel less like conflict and more like two ships passing in thick fog, their signals too weak to properly align. There is a quiet resentment brewing in her, the feeling that she has prioritized nurturing the foundation while he has been relentlessly scaling the tower, forgetting that the foundation needs maintenance too. The introduction of that external element, perhaps a colleague of Sarah's, someone who sees her not as an appendage to Reza's success, but as an individual intellectual force, is devastating precisely because it's ordinary. This person listens without waiting for their turn to speak. They ask follow-up questions that demonstrate actual retention of previous conversations. It isn't seduction. It's validation, something the 7-year routine has systematically starved. This observation forces Sarah to see the dullness in her own reflection when she looks at Reza, realizing she has been offering him the same emotionally depleted version of herself. The film beautifully contrasts the vibrant, unfiltered chaos of their early dating life, the impulsive road trips, the shared thrill of achieving small milestones together, with the polished, carefully curated facade they present to friends and family now. They've become excellent actors in the play of successful couple. The details are painful. The way Reza automatically checks his watch when Sarah starts recounting a story. The practiced smile Sarah offers when someone praises Reza's latest professional achievement. A smile that doesn't quite reach her tired eyes. The climax often involves a moment of quiet breaking, perhaps during a mundane activity like grocery shopping or folding laundry, where the sheer exhaustion of maintaining the pretense finally gives way. The confession isn't about infidelity. It's about a gradual, almost accidental drift, a realization that their individual definitions of success and happiness have become mutually exclusive. The 7 years weren't wasted, the film implies, but they were transformative, revealing that the people who fell in love are not the same people living in that apartment today. The resolution, if one can call it that, is steeped in melancholy acceptance, the recognition that sometimes love is strong enough to sustain a shared history, but not strong enough to bridge the chasm of divergent futures. It is the acknowledgement that some endings are simply the painful recognition that two worthwhile paths have irrevocably separated. The suffocating normalcy is perhaps the most insidious character in this narrative. We see it reflected in the way their apartment, once a testament to their shared nascent style, maybe eclectic, full of thrifted finds and ambitious art projects, has morphed into something sterile and functional, chosen more for its proximity to work hubs than for its soul. Reza's increasing focus on the digital landscape of his career has made him physically present, but mentally miles away, often finding solace in the quantifiable metrics of his code, a world where problems have definitive solutions, unlike the labyrinthine emotional landscape of his partnership with Sarah. His inspiration, once fueled by late-night discussions with Sarah about societal structures that informed her teaching, now feels isolated, like a highly specialized muscle atrophying from lack of use in the broader context of their life. Sarah's internal world, meanwhile, has become rich with unspoken narratives. She carries the weight of their shared memories, replaying pivotal moments in her mind, trying to pinpoint the exact turning point where mutual enthusiasm curdled into polite tolerance. Her dedication to her students, demanding deep wells of empathy and patience, ironically depletes the reserves she needs for her own relationship. She remembers how, early on, Reza used to admire her passion for bringing history alive for teenagers, seeing it as a noble pursuit. Now, when she describes the struggle to engage a particularly apathetic class, his well-meaning but empty advice, maybe gamify the syllabus, feels like a dismissal of the core of her professional identity. The external validation Sarah receives is so jarring because it illuminates what she's starved of: focused, appreciative attention. The colleague, let's call him Bhima, doesn't offer career advice. He simply remembers the nuanced point she made last Tuesday about the Ottoman Empire's impact on modern bureaucracy. This simple act of being heard awakens a dormant part of Sarah, a longing for intellectual partnership that Reza's professional tunnel vision has choked off. It's a slow-motion realization that she has been waiting for him to look up, but he is too busy building something he expects her to admire from the ground floor, without ever inviting her onto the scaffolding. The film brilliantly uses visual motifs to underscore their disconnection. Scenes of them eating dinner often feature an unseen barrier, a strategically placed laptop, a tower of mail, or simply the way the light falls, casting one person in shadow while the other is sharply illuminated, suggesting a temporal difference in their emotional presence. Even their physical intimacy, when it occurs, feels scheduled and obligatory, a checkbox ticked rather than an authentic convergence. The passion that once exploded between them, reminiscent of the heady, slightly chaotic freedom of their early 20s, when they were just starting out and living off ramen and dreams, has been carefully packed away, labeled "Do Not Open Until Retirement." The final confrontation is less about blame and more about accounting. It happens perhaps in the stark, unforgiving light of a shared, empty room, possibly after they have reluctantly cleaned out a storage unit filled with artifacts of their shared past: old concert tickets, a broken pottery class project. The realization dawns that the people who signed up for the 7-year plan are gone, replaced by two separate individuals who only share a mortgage and a mutual, exhausting politeness. The film suggests that sometimes enduring love isn't about fighting to stay tethered to the past version of each other, but having the courage to witness the transformation and grant the other, and oneself, the difficult grace of an individual future. It's the quiet, devastating acceptance that 7 years of shared history doesn't guarantee a shared destination. The aftermath of the realization hangs heavy, a silence more complex than any argument they ever had. It is the silence of two architects standing amidst the ruins of a structure they both painstakingly built, now recognizing that the blueprints no longer match the landscape. They begin the painful process of compartmentalization, not maliciously, but with a strange, almost clinical detachment. Small territories within their shared home become tacitly ceded. Reza retreats further into the glow of his screens, his digital creations becoming his primary companions, while Sarah invests more profoundly in the tangible reality of her students' growth, finding a sense of purpose in shaping external futures rather than salvaging their own. This period sees a bizarre sort of harmony emerge, born not of resolution, but of mutual surrender. They are polite ghosts haunting the same space. Dinners become exercises in conversational triage, where topics are strictly limited to logistics, utility bills, necessary repairs, the mechanics of their social calendar. The deep, probing questions: how are you really feeling? Or, what do you secretly hope for next year? Have been filed away under too dangerous to open. They move around each other with the careful choreography of strangers in an elevator, acutely aware of the other's presence, but utterly barred from true contact. The film focuses intently on the small acts of separating their identities that precede the official separation. Reza starts investing in solitary hobbies, perhaps high-end audio equipment or complex solo cycling, activities that require singular focus and leave no room for shared experience. Sarah, conversely, begins curating her own small social circle, friends who understand the demands of her profession without reference to Reza's achievements or perceived failures. We see her laughing genuinely with these new allies over a bottle of wine, a vibrancy returning to her face that Reza hasn't seen in years, a sight that fills him with a complex mix of relief and a sharp, unexpected pang of proprietary loss. The true tragedy is underscored by their continuing respect for the person they once loved. This isn't a story of malice or dramatic betrayal. It is the slow attrition caused by incompatible growth rates. They are still fundamentally good people, but the crucible of 7 years has forged them into incompatible shapes. When the final decision to dissolve the partnership is finally voiced, it is done so with a heartbreaking sincerity, almost a mutual apology for not being able to keep pace with each other's inevitable evolution. The closing scenes often eschew grand declarations, instead focusing on the mundane logistics of dividing shared objects. Who gets the worn-out sofa? Who keeps the collection of vinyl records? Each box packed is another layer of 7 years shed, leaving them lighter, perhaps, but undeniably unmoored from the history they once defined themselves by. It's a quiet testament to the fact that sometimes the most loving thing two people can do is acknowledge that their narratives have run their course, even if the love that started the journey was real. The actual separation, when it arrives, is almost anticlimactic, deliberately stripped of the melodrama that might have offered some cathartic release. Instead, it's characterized by an unnerving civility that speaks volumes about the emotional energy already exhausted during the preceding years of drift. They approach the division of their life like two seasoned professionals, wrapping up a difficult, but ultimately necessary, joint venture. Consider the ritual of dividing their bookshelves. This seemingly simple task becomes an agonizing excavation of shared intellectual history. Reza carefully selects texts related to algorithms and efficiency, pragmatic volumes that mirror his current professional ethos. Sarah lingers over novels and poetry, the things she used to read aloud to him on quiet Sunday mornings, now reclaimed as purely her own territory. There's a moment where she picks up a tattered paperback of philosophy they bought on a backpacking trip early in their relationship. The spine is cracked precisely where they argued over a passage in a cafe overlooking a bustling European square. She holds it, a flicker of the old shared ambition crossing her face, before placing it firmly in her box, a deliberate act of memorializing the past without trying to transplant it into the future. Their attempts at maintaining friendly contact post-split are fraught with the danger of accidental reconnection. Reza, ever the problem solver, might send Sarah a meticulously worded email about transferring the remaining insurance policies, professional in tone, yet deeply intimate in its shared knowledge of their entangled affairs. Sarah often finds herself resisting the urge to reply with the easy familiarity they once shared, forcing herself to edit out any hint of affection or shared humor. The public performances continue for a time, attending necessary mutual functions, offering carefully calibrated summaries of their new lives that sound successful but lack texture. The film finds poignant moments in these residual habits. Reza catches himself reaching for Sarah's favorite mug during his solitary morning coffee, only to stop his hand mid-air, realizing the gesture is now an absurdity. Sarah, while grading papers late one night, instinctively saves a particularly insightful student essay, intending to show Reza later, only to be stopped by the emptiness of her desk lamp's spotlight. These are the phantom limbs of a long relationship, the muscles of habit twitching long after the partnership has ceased to function. The true inspiration for the characters seems to emerge from this very fragmentation. Reza, stripped of the need to constantly balance his professional drive with domestic compromise, might channel his newly freed mental space into a groundbreaking personal project, finding a stark, cold success that feels fundamentally incomplete without Sarah's acknowledging presence. Sarah, liberated from the emotional labor of maintaining a relationship on life support, dedicates herself fully to teaching, perhaps even launching a mentorship program she had long deferred. Their individual careers accelerate, but the cost, the shared narrative, is visible in every solo achievement. The film leaves us with the impression that while they might have failed at Akhiri Cinta, ending love, they are perhaps succeeding, painfully, at starting the next, singular chapters of their own lives, recognizing that 7 years was the necessary incubation period before they could both truly become the adults they were meant to be, separately. The final act pivots on the inevitable overlap of their newly defined solitary paths, proving that severing the threads of 7 years is a process, not an event. We see them encounter each other, months after the formal separation, in spaces that were once exclusively theirs, now suddenly foreign territory. Perhaps it's the old neighborhood bookstore, or maybe a mutual friend's milestone birthday party. These encounters are masterclasses in emotional choreography, showcasing the immense energy required to maintain the facade of amicable detachment. Reza, often driven by a need for measurable achievement, has clearly found professional success, yet there's a rigidity to his demeanor. His tailored clothes and streamlined schedule speak to a hyper-optimization of self, a subconscious attempt to control the variables that escaped his control in the relationship. When he speaks to Sarah, his voice is lower, measured, almost cautious, as if afraid a stray anecdote might reveal the lingering ache beneath his newly polished exterior. He's built his new world on efficiency, perhaps forgetting that life, like good design, needs room for delightful inefficiency. Sarah, conversely, radiates a subtle, resilient glow. Her exhaustion has been replaced by a quiet focus. Her inspiration, once constantly seeking external validation, is now sourced internally, nurtured by the impact she has on her students, a living legacy that no lines of code can replicate. She looks healthier, though carrying the subtle scar of the breakup in the way she avoids lingering eye contact. When they discuss their lives in abbreviated pleasantries, Sarah is keenly aware of the gap. Reza is talking about climbing higher, while she is talking about digging deeper into the human element of her work. The pivotal moment of this stage isn't a confrontation, but a shared moment of recognition across a crowded room. Maybe they both watch a younger couple across the floor, a couple radiating the chaotic, unself-conscious joy they once possessed. For a brief second, their carefully constructed emotional barriers drop. There's no blame, only a profound shared melancholy, a look that says, we knew that version of ourselves, and we couldn't save her, him. It's the shared understanding that they were perfect collaborators for one stage of life, but not for the next. The film's conclusion suggests that their journey wasn't about finding the right external partner, but about weathering the intense pressure of mutual evolution. The ending is realistic. They don't reconcile in a burst of renewed passion, nor do they end in bitter enmity. Instead, they offer each other a genuine, if distant, farewell, a quiet acknowledgement of the profound role the other played in shaping who they are now, both individually and professionally. They walk away from that shared space, not toward each other, but forward on their distinct, newly cleared paths, finally free from the burden of trying to fit 7 years of shared history into a future that demanded something different from both of them. The silence that follows is not emptiness, but the vast, open space of potential, finally unburdened by the ghosts of what used to be. The lingering resonance of their separation is captured not in grand, sweeping statements of freedom, but in the almost mundane reality of their new, separate routines. We see glimpses of their individual landscapes months later, illustrating how the habits once intertwined are now being meticulously rewoven into singular tapestries. Reza, in his stark, minimalist apartment, a space designed for maximum productivity, is seen engaging with his work in a way that is almost ascetic. His career in tech, once a means to build a shared future, is now an end in itself. His inspiration seems drawn from the very structure he imposed on his life. The clean lines and predictable outcomes of his projects reflect a deep-seated need for control that the relationship lacked. He has achieved a level of professional recognition, perhaps a major funding round or a critical industry award, but these victories are punctuated by moments of profound stillness, where the digital glow of his monitors seems to illuminate only his solitude. He looks successful, yet there is a hollowness around his achievements, a sense that the audience for his triumphs has permanently departed. Sarah's journey is marked by a less visible, more internal flourishing. Her dedication to education deepens. She finds a renewed fire in tackling systemic issues within her school district, moving beyond the classroom and into policy advocacy, a sphere requiring the empathy she honed while managing Reza's emotional distance for so long. Her inspiration now comes from the tangible change she can effect in young lives. We see her leading a late-night community meeting, commanding the room not with technical jargon, but with impassioned, ethically grounded arguments. She carries the wisdom gleaned from the 7 years, the knowledge of what happens when emotional connection is sacrificed for external scaffolding, and uses it as a moral compass in her new endeavors. There is a newfound steadiness to her gaze, the kind that comes from knowing precisely what one stands for, even if it means standing alone. The film subtly suggests that their professional trajectories have been ironically catalyzed by the breakup. Reza's singular focus, once perceived as neglect, now fuels his ascent in a ruthlessly competitive field. Sarah's newfound autonomy allows her to pursue the kind of deep, meaningful societal impact that would have always been secondary in the shared life they maintained. They haven't become happier in the traditional sense, but they have become more authentically themselves, forged in the necessary heat of separation. The final, subtle nod to their past comes in a scene where Sarah is mentoring a young student, perhaps a budding artist or engineer, someone brimming with the same unbridled, slightly terrifying ambition she once shared with Reza. She offers advice that is both professionally astute and deeply emotionally informed, a synthesis of her own experience. She tells the student that ambition is vital, but warns them against building a world so solid that there is no room left for the unpredictable beauty of shared, unplanned moments. It's a silent message to the ghost of Reza, an acknowledgement that their story wasn't a failure of love, but a necessary, albeit painful, redirection of two powerful currents that could no longer flow in the same riverbed. The narrative closes not on them meeting again, but on the quiet dignity of two people who have finally stopped apologizing for needing different horizons. The concluding images of the film linger not on separation, but on the echo of their shared history imprinted onto their distinct futures. We observe Reza, perhaps now leading a small team in a sleek, glass-walled office space, presenting his latest innovation. His success is undeniable. The projections on the screen are flawless, mirroring the meticulous order he imposes on his personal life. Yet the atmosphere around him is brittle. There is a scene where, after a major presentation, a junior colleague attempts to offer him a spontaneous, celebratory high five, a gesture of unreserved enthusiasm. Reza hesitates, his hand lifting halfway before dropping, a muscle memory from years of filtering spontaneous emotion around Sarah, who would have either met his energy or gently redirected it. Now he defaults to a polite, contained nod, and the colleague backs away, sensing the invisible perimeter he has erected. His inspiration, once a dynamic interplay between analytical thought and emotional resonance, a quality Sarah always fostered, has become purely cerebral, leading to success that feels strangely airless. Sarah, meanwhile, is shown utilizing the empathy she fought so hard to preserve. She is not only advocating for policy changes, but is actively mentoring a new cohort of teachers in underserved schools. Her inspiration stems from the messy, unpredictable, and intensely human reality of her work, the very chaos Reza once sought to escape through his digital pursuits. In one particularly moving scene, she is sharing an extremely simple meal, perhaps just takeout, on a worn blanket outdoors, with a group of her young mentees. Their laughter is loud, unrestrained, and spills out into the evening air. Sarah participates fully, her face illuminated by a genuine, uncomplicated joy. It is the joy of shared struggle and mutual support, something she deeply craves and now finds in this chosen, professional family. The visual contrast is stark. Reza's success is bathed in sterile, controlled light, while Sarah's is colored by the warm, imperfect glow of human connection. The film subtly suggests that the 7 years served as an essential, albeit painful, apprenticeship in self-knowledge. They had to break apart to fully understand the contours of their own needs, needs that were simply incompatible when overlaid upon each other. There is a final, non-verbal moment that encapsulates this. Months later, Reza is traveling for work. Perhaps he finds himself unexpectedly in the same city where Sarah is presenting at an educational conference. They do not meet, but perhaps they are in the same hotel lobby, briefly catching sight of each other across the expanse of polished marble. Their eyes meet for a fraction of a second. There is no longing, no bitterness, only a deep, settled understanding, a mutual salute across separate achievements. They acknowledge the debt they owe each other for the years they tried to merge their trajectories. It is the quiet, resolved conclusion that sometimes the end of a committed relationship is the necessary prerequisite for the start of two authentic individual lives built on the foundations of what they learned rather than what they intended to keep. The love didn't die. It simply transformed into the wisdom that allowed them to finally let go and move on, each finally pursuing the specific brand of inspiration that only their singular path could offer. The enduring power of the narrative lies in its refusal to offer a simplistic villain or hero. The antagonists are time, changing ambition, and the insidious complacency of comfort. We revisit a brief, almost subliminal shot early in the film, a close-up of their hands, intertwined, holding identical, half-finished cups of coffee on a rainy morning. This image, once symbolizing unity and shared potential, is later juxtaposed with shots of their hands, now performing entirely separate tasks, Reza's rapidly typing code, Sarah's firmly grasping a sheaf of marked papers. This visual language illustrates the divergence, not as an active choice to leave, but as a passive consequence of evolving professional identities demanding singular focus. Reza's artistic inspiration, rooted in the precision of structure, eventually leads him to design automated systems that remove human error, a metaphor for his relationship approach. He seeks flawless execution, a world where variables like emotion and compromise are engineered out. His colleagues admire his drive, attributing his relentless pace to the fire of a man deeply dedicated to his vision. However, this dedication comes at the cost of nuance. He misses the very human messiness that Sarah, the history teacher who values the rich, often contradictory nature of human narrative, thrives on. Sarah's work, conversely, forces her into the messy center of human struggle, refining her ability to nurture growth under adverse conditions. Her professional ascent is defined by resilience. The patience she once deployed, waiting for Reza to truly listen, is now channeled into advocating for curriculum changes that will take years to implement, a long-term investment in community, contrasting sharply with Reza's short-cycle product releases. Her moments of true inspiration come when a former student, now in college, writes to her, detailing how her lessons shaped their worldview. These letters, kept in a simple wooden box, become her counter-trophy cabinet to Reza's sleek accolades. The film's true emotional climax arrives not when they finalize the property division, but when they accidentally encounter each other's new spheres of influence. Perhaps Reza attends a corporate gala where Sarah is speaking on educational equity, or vice versa. Seeing the other thrive in a world defined by their opposing values, Reza witnessing Sarah's impact on people, Sarah observing Reza's influence on systems, is the final, bittersweet confirmation that they each found their rightful place, but that place was not beside the other. It's the realization that the 7 years were not a mistake, but a necessary calibration period, allowing both to shed the skin of their younger, mutually accommodating selves. They part ways with a profound, unspoken gratitude for the forced clarity, understanding that the failure to sustain the partnership was, ironically, the catalyst for their individual successes, leading them to careers that finally align with the deepest, most immutable aspects of their characters. The story concludes not with a grand Hollywood reunion or a bitter, drawn-out legal battle, but with a quiet, almost philosophical acceptance of divergence. The final lingering shots focus on the physical spaces they once shared, now inhabited by their separate energies. Reza's old side of the closet is starkly empty, the space holding the ghost of his clean, sharp geometry, while Sarah's side is slowly filling with the eclectic clutter of her renewed personal tastes. More books, perhaps a slightly chaotic collection of plants she is determined to keep alive. These details speak volumes about the nature of their reconciliation, not with each other, but with themselves. Reza's final professional triumph, a successful international launch, is shown through a quick montage of digital news feeds and congratulatory texts. He looks out over the city lights from a high-rise office, the world subdued and manageable beneath him. His inspiration is now purely internal, self-sustaining, and slightly lonely. He has mastered the art of building systems, a direct translation of his early ambition. But the human element, the unpredictable vital spark Sarah once provided, is permanently absent from his calculus. He achieves the goal, but the celebratory silence in his expensive apartment feels heavy, a testament to a victory shared with no one who truly remembers the initial, shared dream written on cheap napkins. Sarah's narrative arc resolves in a classroom, bathed in the warm, slightly dusty light of late afternoon. She is surrounded by the energy of her students, deeply engaged in a discussion about historical consequence and moral responsibility. She is not just teaching, she is actively shaping the future through consistent, empathetic presence. Her greatest inspiration now is the realization that her strength lies in navigating complexity, not simplifying it. When a former student, now successful in an unrelated field, stops by to thank her, their conversation is rich, full of genuine warmth and intellectual depth. This interaction is Sarah's true award. It confirms that her values, human connection, narrative integrity, have found fertile ground, even if that ground was not the one she initially planned to cultivate with Reza. The film offers one last, significant juxtaposition. We see both characters independently engaging in a solitary activity they once cherished together, but abandoned during the stagnation years, perhaps watching a specific, complex foreign film they both loved. Reza watches it alone on a massive screen, pausing frequently to analyze the cinematography or score, appreciating its technical brilliance. Sarah watches it on a much smaller screen, perhaps on a train or in a quiet corner of her home, weeping openly during a poignant scene, experiencing the narrative emotionally rather than analytically. They are engaging with the same cultural artifact, yet their interpretations are now perfectly aligned with their divergent post-relationship selves. The final frame doesn't show them together, but rather a wide shot of the city skyline at dawn, a vast, indifferent backdrop to countless separate stories unfolding. The 7 years were the crucible where two people learned precisely who they were by failing to sustain a life designed for someone they no longer were. The end of their love was not an ending of life, but the necessary, painful precondition for their true individual beginnings. The message is clear. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is recognizing when two worthwhile journeys must politely diverge to reach their authentic destinations. The finality of their parting is underscored by the shedding of external symbols that once bound them. We see them in transit, perhaps exchanging keys or official documents through a neutral intermediary, a lawyer, or a mutual weary friend who simply wants the entanglement to cease. This formalized division highlights the irony. They can meticulously divide furniture and financial assets, yet the intangible architecture of their shared memories remains stubbornly indivisible, existing in a kind of psychic escrow. Reza, immersed in the high-stakes, future-oriented world of technology, begins to see time itself as a resource to be optimized, a philosophy directly reflected in his work. His inspiration sharpens into an almost ruthless focus. He develops a reputation for being brilliantly successful but emotionally inaccessible, a figure admired from a distance, much like the abstract concepts he engineers. There is a fleeting moment where he visits a gallery showcasing abstract, mathematically derived art. He appreciates the structure, the predictable beauty of the patterns, but the pieces lack any discernible human narrative. He notes this absence, not with regret for Sarah, but with a detached observation about an unquantifiable variable in his own pursuit of perfection. His career soars, but the height feels increasingly thin, lacking the grounding provided by shared vulnerability. Sarah's world, conversely, becomes richer in texture and human consequence. Her career pivot towards systemic advocacy demands confronting messy, real-world inefficiencies, the very kind of problems Reza's career seeks to eliminate. She finds profound inspiration in the slow, hard-won victories of community organizing. We see her rallying a group of parents, her voice filled with conviction, drawn from the hard-won knowledge of what happens when true partnership fails. She has learned the necessity of persistence in the face of ambiguity. The emotional resilience she developed, enduring 7 years of emotional distraction, now serves as the bedrock for leading complex, often frustrating human endeavors. Her life is now characterized by necessary friction, the very thing Reza's new life seeks to minimize. The film ultimately posits that their 7 years together were a necessary form of cross-training for their individual destinies. Reza needed the relationship to understand the limits of purely logical construction, and Sarah needed the relationship's collapse to realize the essential value of her own independent, emotionally driven ambition. They were both waiting for the other to validate a fundamental part of themselves, a validation that was never forthcoming because their core drives had become too divergent. The final quiet scene involves Sarah looking at an old photograph, not of her and Reza together, but of herself at graduation, eyes blazing with idealism before the compromises began. She smiles, a genuine smile free of the forced politeness that characterized the later years. Simultaneously, a parallel scene shows Reza in his immaculate office, looking at a complex schematic. He sees a small, almost invisible flaw in the design, a potential point of failure, and instead of immediately correcting it to match the perfect blueprint, he pauses. He allows the flaw to remain, perhaps recognizing it as a necessary imperfection, a tiny nod to the unpredictable nature of existence that he had tried so hard to engineer out of his life. It is the smallest shift in his worldview, a recognition that absolute control comes at the price of life itself. The story concludes not with closure, but with the steady, assured beat of two separate hearts finally moving in time with their own unique rhythms, acknowledging that the end of their shared love was the true genesis of their individual successes. The lingering shadow of their cohabitation manifests in the residual, almost spectral presence in their shared digital history. Months after the finalization of the separation, Reza finds himself subconsciously opening a shared photo album on his cloud drive, only to be met with years of vibrant images that now feel like artifacts from another civilization. He sees Sarah laughing, unburdened, her face lit up by the glow of a bonfire from a spontaneous weekend trip, a memory utterly dissonant with the controlled, scheduled joy he now cultivates. He scrolls past thousands of pictures, his analytical mind cataloging the shifting aesthetics, the changing styles, but his heart, a muscle long dormant in the context of intimacy, registers only the profound absence of the shared context that once made those images meaningful. He closes the folder abruptly, the act less about moving on and more about containing a file too large for his current processing power. Sarah, confronting the reality of her accelerated professional purpose, discovers that the deep well of empathy she utilizes for community organizing occasionally spills over into misplaced concern for Reza. She catches herself mentally drafting responses to professional dilemmas he might face, a witty rebuttal for a skeptical investor, or a framework for handling an unexpected logistical failure, only to realize she has no conduit for these thoughts. The urge to fix or support him dissolves when she recalls the years she spent waiting for him to reciprocate that energy. Her inspiration now is self-referential. She is building the support network she desperately needed him to be. Her success manifests in tangible, immediate ways: a policy passed, a student finding stability, real-world metrics that satisfy her need for visible contribution, something intangible code updates never offered. The film cleverly uses sound design to illustrate their diverging realities. Reza's world is dominated by sharp, clean audio cues. The satisfying click of a mechanical keyboard, the crisp ring of a successful video conference connection, the muted hum of high-efficiency ventilation in his sterile apartment. Sarah's environment is rich with ambient noise, the cacophony of a busy school corridor, the muffled applause from a town hall meeting, the sound of rain drumming unevenly on the roof of her older, slightly quirky apartment, a space chosen for its character, not its convenience. This auditory contrast underscores their fundamental incompatibility. He thrives in the manufactured, predictable environment. She draws strength from the organic, complex symphony of human reality. Their final, unspoken acknowledgement occurs not through a planned meeting, but through an accidental, public intersection of their new worlds. Perhaps Reza is attending a tech convention adjacent to a major educational summit where Sarah is keynote speaking. He catches a snippet of her address through an open doorway. She isn't speaking about history. She is speaking about the ethical imperative of human-centered design in policy, a concept that bridges both their worlds but approaches it from opposite poles. She speaks of the necessary human margin of error, while Reza's career is dedicated to eliminating that very margin. For a moment, he is paralyzed, seeing the synthesis he always hoped for, realizing it could only ever exist in theory, never in their shared practice. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated recognition. They both became stronger, more focused versions of themselves, but that strength required them to shed the other. The closing sequence emphasizes resilience over romance. We see Sarah, late one evening, looking out her window at the city lights, lights powered by the very infrastructure Reza perfects. She isn't looking at them with resentment, but with a mature understanding of interdependence. She knows his world exists, and she has carved out a vital, necessary counterworld. The final shot lingers on a single item left behind by Reza, a specialized Ethernet cable coiled neatly beside a stack of Sarah's well-worn history texts. It's an object that symbolizes connection, yet it lies unused, a relic of a path they both consciously chose not to follow anymore. It signifies that they were once connected by something essential, but that connection ultimately became obsolete, leaving behind only the possibility of forward motion, separated but fundamentally changed by the 7 years they spent trying and failing to be one. The narrative tapestry of Akhiri Cinta, often 7. Tahun unfurls with the quiet desperation of a relationship worn thin by the passage of time and the slow accumulation of unspoken grievances. It is a film that dares to examine the messy, often mundane realities of long-term commitment, eschewing the glossy veneer often applied to cinematic romance. The central dynamic between the protagonists is immediately arresting, not for its passionate fireworks, but for its suffocating familiarity. We witness a partnership that has settled into a comfortable, yet ultimately sterile, routine. The portrayal of the central couple is anchored by performances that suggest a deep, almost unconscious understanding of each other, a shorthand built over 7 years that has become both their strength and their cage. One cannot analyze this film without considering the actors' backgrounds. If the leading man has a career trajectory marked by nuanced portrayals of the everyman struggling with existential pressures, perhaps drawing on sensibilities seen in earlier domestic dramas he championed, it informs his muted performance here. His silence speaks volumes, echoing the internal retreats many face when confronted with the specter of finality. Similarly, the leading lady's journey in the film reflects a common evolution seen in actors known for their ability to convey complex internal conflict through subtle facial expressions. Her yearning for connection, buried beneath layers of responsibility and habit, is palpable. It suggests an artist who has consistently sought roles requiring emotional excavation rather than grand gestures, lending authenticity to the film's subdued tone. The film draws its thematic power from an almost anthropological observation of relationship decay. The 7-year mark, often mythologized in pop culture as a critical juncture, is here treated not as an external curse, but as an internal negotiation. It's the point where initial infatuation has fully metabolized into shared history, and the question shifts from, do we love each other, to, is this love enough to sustain us? Visually, the film adopts a muted palette, mirroring the emotional landscape of the characters. The cinematography favors natural light and tight framing, creating a sense of claustrophobia that underscores the characters' inability to see beyond their immediate domestic confines. This aesthetic choice is clearly intentional, deliberately steering away from the vibrant, saturated look of honeymoon phase romances. The setting itself, a home that feels lived in, cluttered with the artifacts of shared memory, becomes an active character, a silent witness to the slow erosion of their bond. The writing excels in its dedication to realism, particularly in the dialogue, or the lack thereof. Arguments rarely escalate into shouting matches. Instead, they manifest as polite evasions, carefully chosen words designed to avoid the true, painful core of the issue. This mirrors the creative inspiration of writers who are often drawn to Chekhovian undertones, the drama residing in what is perpetually unsaid, the missed opportunities for sincerity. When moments of potential breakthrough occur, they are often undercut by external trivialities, a ringing phone, an urgent work email, suggesting that modern life acts as a relentless counterforce to genuine emotional intimacy. The film argues convincingly that sometimes the greatest obstacle to salvation isn't external sabotage, but sheer inertia. Akhiri Cinta. Tahun is ultimately a meditation on memory and expectation. The characters are constantly comparing the vibrant promise of their beginning to the quiet ambiguity of their present. The film does not offer easy answers or neat resolutions. Instead, it leaves the audience contemplating the profound courage, or perhaps the immense difficulty, involved in choosing whether to renovate a life built over 7 years or to finally walk away from the blueprint. It is a mature cinematic offering, respecting the complexity of sustained human connection by refusing to simplify its inevitable challenges. The emotional texture of the film deepens as the narrative explores the subtle acts of emotional withdrawal. We observe the lead actress, whose prior roles might have showcased fierce independence or defiant passion, now channeling that energy inward. Her meticulous attention to domestic detail, the perfectly folded laundry, the precisely arranged dinner table, becomes a fragile armor against vulnerability. This obsessive order is a direct counterpoint to the chaos brewing beneath the surface, a visual manifestation of her attempt to control the one aspect of her life she still can manage when the emotional connection feels entirely beyond her grasp. This subtle obsession is heartbreaking because it suggests a woman pouring her considerable vitality into maintenance rather than creation or shared experience. The male protagonist, conversely, retreats into his work, a well-worn path for actors whose personas are built on quiet competence, marred by a profound internal dissatisfaction. His professional success, perhaps showcased in earlier, more triumphant roles, now feels hollow, an elaborate distraction. When he is home, his presence is heavy but passive. He occupies space without truly inhabiting it. There is a recurring motif of him staring out of windows, not necessarily looking at anything specific, but using the glass as a barrier between his internal world and the shared space of the living room. This visual language reinforces the theme that separation doesn't always require physical distance. It thrives in proximity when communication channels have corroded. The film's brilliance lies in its refusal to assign clear villainy. Neither character is malicious. They are simply exhausted by the effort required to maintain a facade of normalcy. Their inertia is perhaps the most terrifying antagonist. This echoes artistic sensibilities that favor ambiguity, acknowledging that in real-life romantic dissolution, the decision to end things is seldom spurred by a single, catastrophic event, but rather by the slow, almost imperceptible drip of unmet needs. One feels the weight of their shared history, pressing down on every interaction, a history that is too precious to casually discard, but too burdensome to carry forward unchanged. Consider a scene where they are watching television, occupying the same couch. The physical closeness is excruciating, precisely because of the emotional gulf. The camera lingers on their hands, inches apart, never touching. This detail speaks volumes about the lost intimacy, the casual brush of a knee, or the shared remote control that once signified effortless partnership now requires conscious decision, and that decision is always postponed. This meticulous observation of physical estrangement makes the film relatable, tapping into the universal anxiety that one day we might simply forget how to touch the person we built our world with. The film suggests that love, like a sophisticated machine, requires constant, mindful upkeep, and when that maintenance ceases, the engine doesn't explode, it simply seizes up quietly. The film subtly explores the concept of parallel lives lived under the same roof, a condition perhaps familiar to actors who have spent extensive periods on location, existing solely within the bubble of a production. For the female lead, this internal world manifests in fleeting moments of remembered passion. Perhaps there is a scene where she finds an old photograph or overhears a snippet of music that instantly transports her back to the initial spark. These flashbacks are not sentimental indulgences, but sharp stabs of contrasting reality, highlighting the chasm between the expectation of enduring romance and the actuality of their current truce. Her acting heritage, often characterized by roles requiring intense emotional recall, informs this portrayal. Her grief is not loud, but a deep, cellular memory of joy that now feels inaccessible. The male protagonist's resistance to confrontation is also layered with the echoes of his career. If he built his reputation on playing characters who solve problems through decisive, logical action, his inability to logically solve the problem of his marriage becomes his ultimate crisis of identity. He tries to apply corporate efficiency to emotional intimacy, attempting to schedule talk time or suggest couples counseling, as if it were a quarterly review. This analytical approach, so effective in his cinematic endeavors, proves utterly impotent here, further isolating him. His frustration is not directed outward at his partner, but inward, a crushing acknowledgement of his own emotional illiteracy when the script deviates from the expected structure. The environment itself continues to act as a psychological pressure cooker. The quietness of their home is frequently punctuated by the sound of objects, the slow tick of an aging clock, the squeak of a floorboard, the distant hum of traffic, all magnified because there is no emotional noise to mask them. This sonic landscape enhances the sense of suspended animation. They are living in the pause between two acts of a play, unable or unwilling to move to the final scene. Their shared past, rather than being a source of comfort, becomes a series of landmines. A simple shared meal can trigger anxiety as they both navigate the unspoken rules of conversation. What topics are safe? What memory might inadvertently lead to an accusation? This dynamic powerfully illustrates how shared history, when not actively nurtured, calcifies into a defensive structure. It demands immense emotional labor just to maintain a superficial peace, labor that both characters are clearly too weary to sustain indefinitely. The film thus becomes a profound, if melancholic, statement on the sheer effort required not just to start a relationship, but to keep it constantly, authentically alive across the years. The film's climax, if one can call such a quiet erosion a climax, avoids the traditional confrontation. There is no dramatic revelation shouted across a rain-soaked living room. Instead, the turning point arrives through an act of profound, almost casual permission. It might manifest as one character, finally cleaning out a drawer of the other's discarded belongings, not in anger, but with a sense of finality, as if archiving a museum exhibit. This action speaks to a deep, shared understanding that the future they had unconsciously promised each other no longer exists, and that the polite preservation of the past is now more damaging than the acknowledgement of its ending. This quiet acquiescence is where the true depth of the acting shines. The actors, drawing perhaps on their own experiences of witnessing relationships gently conclude rather than violently shatter, manage to convey acceptance laced with immense, unresolved grief. It's the grief of losing not a person, but a shared, projected future, the ghost of the life they were supposed to have lived together. For the actress, whose career often required her to embody powerful, decisive women, this submission to fate is a powerful performance choice, suggesting that even the strongest will eventually tire of fighting against the current of time. The narrative resolution, or lack thereof, deliberately mirrors the ambiguity of real separation. We are not shown them walking into separate futures, neatly packaged and ready for a sequel. Instead, the final moments often focus on the small details of the dispersal of their shared space, a lingering shot on a single set of keys on a counter, or the way the morning light now falls unimpeded across a space that was once cluttered with shared presence. This emphasizes that ending a 7-year relationship isn't a singular event. It's the slow, almost geological process of reshaping the physical and emotional landscape they painstakingly built together. The film asserts that sometimes the most courageous act is accepting that the masterpiece you are working on together is finished, and it's time to lay down the tools without bitterness, only a profound, shared exhaustion. The enduring power of Akhiri Cinta. 7. Tahun resides in its final, lingering silence, the echo that follows the dispersal of shared objects. It's a film that understands that departure from a long-term partnership is often less about the dramatic final words and more about the awkwardness of division, the untangling of intertwined possessions and memories. The aftermath depicted is not one of catharsis, but of necessary, sterile administration. We see the characters meticulously dividing their possessions, a process that forces them to assign objective value to deeply subjective history. That chipped coffee mug, once a source of shared laughter over a clumsy morning, now becomes a point of contention, or, more poignantly, a token simply handed over because neither can bear the thought of the other possessing it. This administrative phase reveals the final layers of their respective coping mechanisms. The man, whose earlier career might have been built on playing decisive executives who command mergers, now struggles to negotiate the division of a shared DVD collection. His attempt to rationalize the division, "You keep the fiction, I'll take the documentaries," is a desperate application of logic, where only emotional accounting is relevant. It shows his complete failure to process the situation on a human level, preferring the comfort of categories over the chaos of feeling. The woman, perhaps channeling the quiet resilience seen in her breakthrough independent roles, handles the separation with a muted dignity that is both admirable and deeply painful to watch. Her moments of true breakdown do not occur during the packing. They happen later, in the stillness of her new, sparsely furnished apartment, when she realizes the silence is no longer a truce, but a permanent condition. She might be seen staring at a wall where a significant piece of art used to hang. The negative space itself becomes the most potent symbol of loss. Her artistic inspiration, often drawn from literature, focusing on female interiority and survival, informs this understated endurance. Her survival is quiet, internal, and deeply costly. Ultimately, the film leaves the viewer with the sense that these two individuals, having survived the crucible of 7 years, have not failed each other so much as they have outgrown the framework they built together. Their journey is a sober reflection on the evolving nature of commitment, suggesting that sometimes the greatest love story ends not in a blaze of passion, but in the quiet, mutual recognition that two separate paths are now the only viable way forward. The film refuses the cinematic lie of resurrection, instead honoring the difficult, necessary truth of closure. The lingering resonance of Akhiri Cinta 7. Tahun stems significantly from its masterful use of negative space in the storytelling, the moments deliberately left unfilled, mirroring the emotional vacuum within the relationship. This is particularly evident in the portrayal of their shared apartment after the initial division of major items. The remaining objects are minor, incidental. They are the detritus of daily life that neither person could quite justify claiming or discarding immediately, trapping them in a purgatory of shared ownership even in separation. Consider the way the camera lingers on their former shared routines. The unused side of the bed, impeccably made up, becomes a stark monument to physical estrangement. The leading lady, whose past performances often featured characters who championed self-actualization through grand creative endeavors, now finds her creativity channeled into managing this enforced solitude. Her attempts to re-engage with her passions, perhaps picking up a long-neglected musical instrument or sketchbook, are tentative, hobbled by the deep exhaustion of emotional warfare. The film suggests that when the foundational support of a primary relationship crumbles, the energy required for self-reconstruction is nearly depleted. The male lead's detachment shifts subtly from passive avoidance to active emotional austerity. If his acting career established him as the reliable, grounded presence, here he is stripping away the very foundations of that reliability. He might start taking calls at odd hours, not out of infidelity, but out of a need to inhabit a life completely unburdened by their shared history, a life where he doesn't have to modulate his tone or censor his successes. His infrequent attempts at polite communication are structured like business correspondence, factual, brief, and devoid of any effective coloring. This reflects an actor who has mastered the projection of authority, but is utterly lost when the script demands genuine, messy vulnerability. The film's most heartbreaking moments are often those where external forces briefly remind them of what they once were. A chance meeting with a mutual friend who remembers them in their prime forces an immediate, artificial performance of contentment. Both protagonists slip into their old roles, he the capable provider, she the supportive partner, only for the facade to crack the moment the friend leaves. This social pressure to maintain appearances, to lie about the depth of their fracture to the outside world, paradoxically tightens the knot of their isolation. They become co-conspirators in their own tragedy, bound by the shared secret of their mutual disillusionment. Akhiri Cinta Tahun thus functions as a profound character study in sustained emotional performance, questioning how long two people can play the roles they once wrote for each other before the script is irrevocably lost. The final act of the film circles back to the concept of memory, not as a source of comfort, but as an inescapable echo chamber. For both characters, the future they imagined together has disintegrated, leaving behind only the tactile reality of the present, which feels thin and ill-fitting. The lead actress, whose previous directorial efforts championed strong female narratives, now faces the ultimate directorial challenge: rewriting her own life script without a co-author. Her moments of quiet reflection often involve walking through spaces they once decorated together, touching the textures of their shared life: the worn wood of a table, the slightly faded print on a beloved throw pillow. These interactions are not sentimental. They are forensic examinations of where the structure failed, an attempt to understand if the foundation was flawed or if the weather simply became too harsh. The male protagonist's transformation is marked by a desperate grasping for novelty, a common trajectory for actors whose success was built on a recognizable, dependable archetype. He might engage in a new, entirely incompatible hobby, one that requires absolute focus and excludes any emotional baggage. This isn't growth, it's avoidance disguised as reinvention. His former screen presence, defined by a comforting steadfastness, is now replaced by a brittle, unpredictable energy. The film suggests that when the commitment of a 7-year bond is broken, the muscle memory of loyalty remains, making new emotional investments terrifyingly difficult. He is left wrestling with the paradox. He wanted out of the stagnation, but the sudden freedom feels empty, a space too large to comfortably inhabit alone. The narrative beautifully juxtaposes their individual absences. When one is home alone, the space feels merely quiet. When they briefly cross paths, perhaps exchanging keys or essential documents, the space crackles with unbearable tension. This tension is the film's core thesis. The true ending of a relationship is often not the decision to leave, but the subsequent, awkward logistics of inhabiting the same world while inhabiting entirely separate psychological universes. The film's power is derived from its refusal to grant either character a clear moral victory or total ruin. Instead, they achieve a state of shared, exhausted neutrality. They have survived the 7 years, but the cost of survival appears to be the very vitality that initially drew them together, leaving behind two highly competent, deeply wounded individuals navigating the ruins of their mutual creation. The final, lingering impression left by Akhiri Cinta 7 Tahun is a profound commentary on the cultural expectation versus the lived reality of romantic longevity. The film operates as a necessary antidote to the saccharine narratives that promise eternal novelty. It suggests that the very success of reaching the 7-year milestone, a benchmark often celebrated in media, is simultaneously the greatest threat, forcing a confrontation with whether shared history is enough to fuel an unknown future. The inspiration for such a grounded, almost bleakly honest portrayal often draws from the filmmaker's documented appreciation for European slow cinema, where character development prioritizes internal shifts over external plot mechanics. The film ultimately posits that growing apart is not a failure of character, but a byproduct of time and separate evolution. The protagonists haven't betrayed each other. They have simply changed at different rates or in divergent directions. The audience is left to appreciate the subtle artistry of the performances, where the greatest emotional exertion is expended not in fighting, but in the meticulous effort to remain polite, functional adults in the presence of the person who knows them best. This final, understated note ensures that the film resonates long after the credits roll, a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes the deepest love story concludes with an immense, respectful silence rather than a dramatic final declaration. The film's quietude, which has defined its entire runtime, finds its final, most chilling expression in the very last moments we see of the protagonists, separated, or perhaps just momentarily distant within the same frame. It is a deliberate withholding of catharsis. If the lead actress, known for channeling intense, almost explosive inner lives into her roles, had opted for a grand, tearful farewell in a previous film, here her final expression is one of eerie calm, a look suggesting she has finally finished an exhausting, protracted negotiation with herself. Her silence is not empty. It is full of the hard-won knowledge of what it costs to stay when the core alignment is lost. This composure speaks to an artist embracing the nuance that true strength often lies in acceptance, not resistance. The male lead mirrors this exhaustion through his physical posture in the concluding scenes. Where earlier he maintained a rigid, almost performative uprightness, suggesting the stability expected of his established on-screen persona, his final walk, whether toward a new door or simply across a room, is subtly slouched, laden with the weight of the unmade decisions finally executed. This subtle physical narrative shift acknowledges that dismantling a shared life requires a profound physical toll, far beyond the emotional. His previous inspiration, perhaps drawn from methodical, problem-solving characters, crumbles when faced with an unsolvable human equation. He learns that some problems cannot be optimized away. The lingering visual motif is often one of light, specifically, the way light enters a room now occupied by only one. Where once the light illuminated shared activity, it now spotlights emptiness. In the woman's new space, the light might feel harsh, exposing the contours of loneliness. In the man's setting, it might seem diffused, reflecting his muted emotional state. The film avoids providing closure in the form of reconciliation or dramatic new love interests. Instead, it offers something far more demanding, the contemplation of ongoing, solitary maintenance. Akhiri Cinta. Tahun functions as a sobering treatise on commitment fatigue, arguing that the most enduring feature of a long partnership is often not the passion that began it, but the sheer, disciplined endurance required to negotiate its inevitable decline. It leaves the audience with the unsettling realization that sometimes saying nothing is the loudest statement of all. The true genius of the film's conclusion lies in its refusal to paint the protagonists as victims of circumstance or external betrayal. They are, instead, architects of their own quiet obsolescence. The 7 years have functioned as an intense, shared apprenticeship in intimacy, an apprenticeship from which both have graduated, albeit with diplomas they don't know how to cash in elsewhere. This mirrors the career arcs of many established artists who, having mastered a particular form, find the subsequent challenge is not learning a new technique, but finding the courage to dismantle their established mastery. For the female lead, this final realization brings a stark clarity. Her past roles, which might have involved fierce battles for external validation, are inverted here. Her victory is internal, the realization that she no longer needs his presence to validate her own worth. This is reflected in a final, almost imperceptible softening around her eyes when she is alone, a look of hard-earned peace, not happiness. It suggests an artist who has finally found the most complex character to inhabit, herself, unburdened by the role of wife. The male lead's concluding ambiguity is equally compelling. He is not redeemed by a sudden surge of emotion, but rather by a small practical gesture of acknowledgement. Perhaps he leaves behind a tool or an item he knows she needs, a final, functional act of care that strips away the pretense of anger. This echoes the grounded realism often favored by actors who transition into producing roles, a move toward tangible control after years spent navigating the illusory world of performance. His acceptance is rooted in logic, yet it carries the weight of deep, unexpressed affection. He understands the efficiency of separating, even if the human cost is devastating. The film, therefore, becomes a quiet elegy for shared infrastructure. It is about the dismantling of routines that were once invisible supports. The shared morning coffee ritual, the synchronized walking pace, the mutual knowledge of which grocery store has the best produce. When these habits are severed, the resulting void is not filled by drama, but by an oppressive, echoing silence. Akhiri Cinta. Tahun. Tahun ultimately argues that the hardest part of finishing a long relationship is not letting go of the person, but learning to live without the perfectly calibrated, 7-year-old version of yourself that only existed in relation to them. The enduring image is one of careful subtraction, where every removed item leaves behind a scar on the shared landscape, a scar that must now be weathered alone. The film's narrative finality is underscored by its masterful use of symbolic geography, focusing intensely on the threshold, the doorway, the car window, the garden gate, as the final physical boundary between their constructed life and their diverging paths. These spaces, once unremarkable parts of their shared domicile, become charged with existential weight. When the female lead finally carries out that last box, the camera treats the movement with the gravity usually reserved for a significant external journey. Her departure is not a flight, but a measured relocation, a necessary act of self-preservation that feels more like a professional assignment, demanding flawless execution than a personal tragedy. This stoicism reflects an actor whose strength lies in embodying resilience against oppressive systems, here internalized as the system of a failing marriage. The male protagonist, left within the confines of the now too large home, seems to shrink into the remaining furniture. His initial attempts at filling the void with activity, perhaps aggressively reorganizing the pantry or attempting a complex repair job, eventually collapse under the weight of the silence. His career, built on the illusion of control and decisive command, finds its limits here. He cannot order the emotional atmosphere of his own house. There's a particularly telling moment where he attempts to use one of their old inside jokes, speaking it aloud to the empty room, only to realize the sound dies flatly, unreflected, highlighting that humor, like intimacy, requires a reciprocal audience to truly exist. The film avoids the easy redemption arc, where one character instantly finds a passionate new connection. Instead, the aftermath focuses on the tedious, lonely work of rebuilding the self from scratch. For both, the external recognition they've built their careers on becomes irrelevant. A standing ovation or a favorable review offers no comfort against the memory of the partner who knew their flaws intimately. This grounds the film in a mature understanding of adult separation. The greatest pain is not the loss of the lover, but the loss of the singular witness to one's own becoming. In its final sequences, Akhiri Cinta, Tahun suggests that time does not necessarily heal, but rather calcifies the experience into wisdom. The 7 years have served as a crucible, forging an unbreakable bond of shared memory even as the relationship itself dissolves. The final shot often focuses not on the individuals, but on the house, the structure that housed their hopes, now standing silent, a monument to a commitment that was deeply felt but ultimately unsustainable. It is a powerful, sobering cinematic statement that recognizes the inherent fragility of human structures built on evolving desires, leaving the audience with the heavy realization that sometimes the most successful completion of a chapter involves simply closing the book without rereading the final pages. The concluding emotional note of the film is a devastating exploration of shared yet unarticulated forgiveness. Having navigated the logistical nightmare of division and the emotional exhaustion of silence, the true resolution hinges on a moment where neither character needs to speak their absolution. This absence of spoken reconciliation is the film's ultimate critique of how deeply communication can corrode. They are too weary, perhaps too proud, to break the established quiet with a declaration of, "It's okay." This is embodied in a final, almost accidental encounter, perhaps years later, completely outside the geography of their former life, a film festival lobby or a quiet gallery opening. The interaction is brief, governed by the practiced politeness of professional acquaintances rather than former soulmates. The actress, whose earlier scenes focused on the painstaking effort of keeping her anxiety hidden behind meticulous domesticity, now possesses a true, unguarded ease. Her earlier armor has dissolved, replaced by a more authentic, if slightly more weathered, self. Her eyes meet his, and in that single glance, years of accumulated resentment, confusion, and tentative understanding are exchanged, acknowledged, and finally released. It is a non-verbal consensus that they both did the best they could with the tools they had, and for that shared, imperfect effort, they forgive each other. The male lead's reaction is equally nuanced. He offers a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture that carries the weight of every unspoken apology he failed to deliver during their tenure together. It's the acknowledgement of the competent executive finally admitting a strategic error, not with shame, but with the quiet dignity of having learned the lesson. His reformed persona is subtly warmer, less rigidly defined, suggesting that the painful demolition of that marriage, while devastating, paradoxically freed him to finally explore the emotional landscape he had previously avoided, on screen and in life. Akhiri Cinta 7. Tahun thus transcends the typical romantic drama by transforming heartbreak into a form of hard-won maturity. The film posits that some relationships are not designed for permanence, but rather for profound transformation. The 7 years were not a failure, but a necessary, if painful, stage of development for two individuals who required separation to fully inhabit their own narratives. The final, haunting silence is not the sound of something broken, but the sound of two separate lives finally beginning to tune themselves to their own distinct frequencies, acknowledging the shared, beautiful, and ultimately temporary key they once played together. The final resonance of this quiet, almost accidental acknowledgement underscores the film's central thesis. The most significant human connections often leave behind an indelible blueprint on the soul, irrespective of their duration. It is the memory of how they learned to be intimate, the scaffolding of shared existence that endures, even if the structure itself collapses. The audience understands that while the passionate memory of their initial spark might remain inaccessible to the female lead, the hard-won empathy derived from the collapse is now deeply integrated into her artistic being. Her future roles, one suspects, will carry an added layer of gravitas, an understanding of fragility gleaned from personal excavation rather than mere emotional recall. For the male protagonist, this final, silent exchange provides a different kind of resolution. His former identity, so tied to projecting unwavering capability, is finally shed. The relief visible in his posture isn't the relief of starting a new romance, but the profound lightness that comes from laying down an unbearable burden of pretense. His career, often criticized for relying on predictable, heroic arcs, may now find an unexpected depth. He has finally lived the complex, messy third act that he was always too afraid to play convincingly on screen, the character who admits fault and accepts imperfection. This subtle transformation suggests that true artistic growth, like true personal growth, requires encountering a reality that refuses to adhere to a neat three-act structure. The film's masterful avoidance of a traditional coda, perhaps showing them years later in wholly separate, fulfilling lives, is crucial. Instead, the final moments retreat back into the domestic sphere, but viewed through a newly altered lens. Maybe the camera focuses on a piece of art they bought together, a slightly abstract painting, which now, viewed alone, reveals entirely new dimensions to each of them. The art hasn't changed, only their capacity to see it differently. This implies that life post-separation is not about finding new narratives, but about reinterpreting the shared artifact of the past with newly calibrated, singular vision. Akhiri Cinta Suju. Tahun thus concludes, not with a dramatic goodbye, but with a profound, shared quietude, a respectful recognition that they were perfectly matched for the journey they took together, but that journey itself was finite. The concluding ambiguity of Akhiri Cinta 7 Tahun is ultimately secured by its dedication to the concept of unresolved necessity. The film does not suggest that they should have stayed together, nor does it offer a definitive verdict on who was more at fault. Instead, it champions the cold, hard truth that some endings are necessary, not because one party failed the other, but because the environment they created became too small for their subsequent growth. This is the film's most radical departure from convention. It reframes the conclusion of a long commitment not as tragedy, but as a required, albeit painful, act of creative release. The legacy of the relationship remains imprinted on their creative outputs, a subtle but pervasive influence that neither can fully erase. For the actress, her subsequent projects might focus on themes of radical self-reliance, imbued with the somber understanding that true independence is often bought at the price of deep, familiar comfort. Her performances gain a sharper, more finely honed edge, the quiet authority of someone who has stared down the potential for ultimate loneliness and found a sustainable foundation within. The male lead's trajectory is marked by a slow shedding of his on-screen machismo, replaced by a weary authenticity. He might choose roles that demand emotional nakedness, roles he previously eschewed as too vulnerable for his brand. This shift is not a calculated career move, but an organic byproduct of having finally experienced the full spectrum of vulnerability within his private life. The 7 years, which initially felt like a stagnation, are retrospectively understood as the mandatory, demanding apprenticeship required to unlock this deeper capacity for genuine feeling. The film's final, lingering shot, perhaps the slow pan across the now empty space where their shared bookshelf once stood, leaving only dust outlines on the wall, serves as the ultimate thesis statement. These outlines are the evidence of their structure, the memory of commitment itself. They are neither happy nor sad. They are simply there, undeniable proof of a significant construction that once stood and whose scaffolding has now been meticulously, respectfully dismantled. Akhiri Cinta 7. Tahun leaves the audience not with the hope of reunion, but with the sobering respect for a chapter that closed precisely when it needed to, an intelligent tribute to the fact that some love stories are perfect, provided they stop exactly when they reach their natural terminus. The film's quiet victory lies in its steadfast refusal to romanticize the residue of their shared life. Even the small, seemingly insignificant items they didn't fight over, a bundle of utility receipts, a slightly mismatched set of keys, a forgotten umbrella, are handled with a detached reverence, suggesting that even the bureaucracy of separation carries its own solemn weight. These objects are not relics to be treasured or destroyed. They are evidence, documented and catalogued, of a time that simply ceases to be applicable to the present moment. This meticulous administration extends to their mutual social circle. The film smartly avoids the inevitable scene where friends take sides or push for a dramatic reconciliation dinner. Instead, the social dispersal is gradual, awkward, and entirely reliant on pre-existing habits. A friend might invite the man to a gathering, only to realize halfway through the evening that the dynamics feel fundamentally skewed without the woman's grounding presence, prompting an embarrassed retreat from forced conviviality. Similarly, the woman finds herself fielding well-meaning but invasive questions from acquaintances, her practiced, polite answers feeling increasingly brittle, revealing the chasm between her public composure and her private disorientation. She learns quickly that while she has successfully shed the partnership, she hasn't yet shed the public projection of that partnership. The ultimate mark of their separation is found in the cessation of shared shorthand. For 7 years, they had built a private language, a quick look that signaled boredom in a meeting, a specific sigh that meant, "I need help," a nuanced tilt of the head that meant, "Let's leave now." In the final moments, we see the painful, clumsy attempts by both characters to communicate these nuanced needs to new, tentative acquaintances, only to find the new language is deafeningly loud, overstated, or simply misunderstood. The actress might try that subtle nod of needing escape in a new conversation, only to be met with a blank stare. The man might use their familiar inflection of gentle irony, and it's taken as genuine criticism. This loss of intuitive understanding becomes the sharpest pinprick of their separation. The realization that building that level of synchronization takes years, and dismantling it leaves them functionally illiterate in the language of immediate intimacy. Akhiri Cinta 7. Tahun ends not on a grand declaration of independence, but on the quiet, enduring grind of relearning vocabulary. It's a film that honors the logistical architecture of a long love, suggesting that true maturity is found in respecting the blueprint of what was built, even when deciding that the space no longer fits who you are becoming. The silence that follows is not a void. It is the sound of two people finally, cautiously, beginning to listen to their own distinct internal rhythms. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Complex Cinema channel. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and give us a like. Today, we are going to discuss the movie Akhiri Cinta, 7 tahun, nonton online. The screen flickers, drawing us into the familiar, yet subtly shifting world of a long-term commitment fraying at the edges. We meet a couple whose 7 years together feel less like a sturdy foundation and more like a well-worn carpet hiding stains they'd rather not acknowledge. There's a palpable sense of routine, that comfortable cage where passion once resided but has since been replaced by the quiet choreography of shared domesticity. The narrative often circles back to their individual pursuits, hinting at the divergent paths they've been unconsciously walking. One character, perhaps steeped in a demanding creative field, maybe architecture or graphic design, something requiring both meticulous detail and bursts of unpredictable inspiration, finds their energy increasingly channeled away from the partnership. Their professional drive, once a source of pride to their partner, now acts as a silent wedge. You can see it in the late nights illuminated by a screen, the quick, distracted kisses. Contrast this with the other's journey. Maybe they are navigating the more emotionally taxing world of education, or perhaps even something entrepreneurial, where the pressure to succeed weighs heavily on their internal landscape. Their moments of vulnerability seem to bounce off the other's preoccupied shield. It's a classic cinematic portrayal of two people occupying the same space, but existing in separate emotional timelines. The crux of the tension arrives, as it often does, not in a dramatic explosion, but through a slow, painful recognition of emotional distance. Perhaps an external figure enters the periphery, not necessarily a rival for affection, but someone who sees one of the main characters with fresh, undistracted eyes, mirroring the attention the partner used to give. This external presence acts less as a catalyst and more as a mirror, forcing the protagonists to confront the reality of what they've lost in their pursuit of stability or career goals. There are flashbacks woven in, brief, sun-drenched glimpses of their early romance, the ambitious plans made over cheap coffee, the shared dreams that felt so achievable then. These memories serve as painful counterpoints to the present stasis. We witness the evolution, or perhaps the devolution, of their communication style, moving from eager sharing to terse summaries of the day. The film excels in capturing the small, almost imperceptible betrayals of neglect. The forgotten anniversary celebrated with a rushed, impersonal gift. The shared hobby dropped because one person simply stopped asking the other to join. These details accumulate, heavy and undeniable. The eventual reckoning isn't clean. It's messy, filled with regret for opportunities missed and words left unsaid during the years when they were still fundamentally aligned. The ending, without offering a neat bow, suggests a necessary, painful shedding. Whether they truly find their way back to each other, or simply find a better, more honest way to let go. The journey is about excavating 7 years of shared history to see what, if anything, is worth salvaging. It's a meditation on the quiet cost of growing up within a relationship designed for people they no longer are. The narrative delves deeper into the texture of their shared existence, revealing the small, almost ritualistic ways they've constructed their separate realities. Imagine one, let's call him Reza, whose career perhaps involves the precise, analytical world of software development, a field demanding absolute focus, which he now carries home like a lead weight. His inspiration, once sparked by shared intellectual curiosity with his partner, Sarah, now comes from abstract problem-solving unrelated to their life. When Sarah tries to talk about her day, maybe she's a high school history teacher, constantly wrestling with the messy, unpredictable nature of human development. Reza's responses are often clipped, his eyes flickering back to the phone or the latest update on his project. He misses the spark in her eye when she talks about a breakthrough with a difficult student, a spark he used to ignite with genuine interest. Sarah, on the other hand, carries the emotional burden of the stagnant atmosphere. Her desire for connection isn't just about grand gestures, it's about the quality of presence. She remembers the early days when Reza, fresh out of university and buzzing with the ambition of building his first successful app, would eagerly sketch out future plans on napkins, and she, inspired by her own youthful idealism, would annotate them with ideas for their shared home life. Now their arguments feel less like conflict and more like two ships passing in thick fog, their signals too weak to properly align. There is a quiet resentment brewing in her, the feeling that she has prioritized nurturing the foundation while he has been relentlessly scaling the tower, forgetting that the foundation needs maintenance too. The introduction of that external element, perhaps a colleague of Sarah's, someone who sees her not as an appendage to Reza's success, but as an individual intellectual force, is devastating precisely because it's ordinary. This person listens without waiting for their turn to speak. They ask follow-up questions that demonstrate actual retention of previous conversations. It isn't seduction. It's validation, something the 7-year routine has systematically starved. This observation forces Sarah to see the dullness in her own reflection when she looks at Reza, realizing she has been offering him the same emotionally depleted version of herself. The film beautifully contrasts the vibrant, unfiltered chaos of their early dating life, the impulsive road trips, the shared thrill of achieving small milestones together, with the polished, carefully curated facade they present to friends and family now. They've become excellent actors in the play of successful couple. The details are painful. The way Reza automatically checks his watch when Sarah starts recounting a story, The practiced smile Sarah offers when someone praises Reza's latest professional achievement, a smile that doesn't quite reach her tired eyes. The climax often involves a moment of quiet breaking, perhaps during a mundane activity like grocery shopping or folding laundry, where the sheer exhaustion of maintaining the pretense finally gives way. The confession isn't about infidelity. It's about a gradual, almost accidental drift, a realization that their individual definitions of success and happiness have become mutually exclusive. The 7 years weren't wasted, the film implies, but they were transformative, revealing that the people who fell in love are not the same people living in that apartment today. The resolution, if one can call it that, is steeped in melancholy acceptance, the recognition that sometimes love is strong enough to sustain a shared history, but not strong enough to bridge the chasm of divergent futures. It is the acknowledgement that some endings are simply the painful recognition that two worthwhile paths have irrevocably separated. The suffocating normalcy is perhaps the most insidious character in this narrative. We see it reflected in the way their apartment, once a testament to their shared nascent style, maybe eclectic, full of thrifted finds and ambitious art projects, has morphed into something sterile and functional, chosen more for its proximity to work hubs than for its soul. Reza's increasing focus on the digital landscape of his career has made him physically present but mentally miles away, often finding solace in the quantifiable metrics of his code, a world where problems have definitive solutions, unlike the labyrinthine emotional landscape of his partnership with Sarah. His inspiration, once fueled by late-night discussions with Sarah about societal structures that informed her teaching, now feels isolated, like a highly specialized muscle atrophying from lack of use in the broader context of their life. Sarah's internal world, meanwhile, has become rich with unspoken narratives. She carries the weight of their shared memories, replaying pivotal moments in her mind, trying to pinpoint the exact turning point where mutual enthusiasm curdled into polite tolerance. Her dedication to her students, demanding deep wells of empathy and patience, ironically depletes the reserves she needs for her own relationship. She remembers how, early on, Reza used to admire her passion for bringing history alive for teenagers, seeing it as a noble pursuit. Now, when she describes the struggle to engage a particularly apathetic class, his well-meaning but empty advice, maybe gamify the syllabus, feels like a dismissal of the core of her professional identity. The external validation Sarah receives is so jarring because it illuminates what she's starved of: focused, appreciative attention. The colleague, let's call him Bhima, doesn't offer career advice. He simply remembers the nuanced point she made last Tuesday about the Ottoman Empire's impact on modern bureaucracy. This simple act of being heard awakens a dormant part of Sarah, a longing for intellectual partnership that Reza's professional tunnel vision has choked off. It's a slow-motion realization that she has been waiting for him to look up, but he is too busy building something he expects her to admire from the ground floor, without ever inviting her onto the scaffolding. The film brilliantly uses visual motifs to underscore their disconnection. Scenes of them eating dinner often feature an unseen barrier, a strategically placed laptop, a tower of mail, or simply the way the light falls, casting one person in shadow while the other is sharply illuminated, suggesting a temporal difference in their emotional presence. Even their physical intimacy, when it occurs, feels scheduled and obligatory, a checkbox ticked rather than an authentic convergence. The passion that once exploded between them, reminiscent of the heady, slightly chaotic freedom of their early 20s, when they were just starting out and living off ramen and dreams, has been carefully packed away, labeled "Do Not Open Until Retirement." The final confrontation is less about blame and more about accounting. It happens perhaps in the stark, unforgiving light of a shared, empty room, possibly after they have reluctantly cleaned out a storage unit filled with artifacts of their shared past. Old concert tickets, a broken pottery class project. The realization dawns that the people who signed up for the 7-year plan are gone, replaced by two separate individuals who only share a mortgage and a mutual, exhausting politeness. The film suggests that sometimes enduring love isn't about fighting to stay tethered to the past version of each other, but having the courage to witness the transformation and grant the other, and oneself, the difficult grace of an individual future. It's the quiet, devastating acceptance that 7 years of shared history doesn't guarantee a shared destination. The aftermath of the realization hangs heavy, a silence more complex than any argument they ever had. It is the silence of two architects standing amidst the ruins of a structure they both painstakingly built, now recognizing that the blueprints no longer match the landscape. They begin the painful process of compartmentalization, not maliciously, but with a strange, almost clinical detachment. Small territories within their shared home become tacitly ceded. Reza retreats further into the glow of his screens, his digital creations becoming his primary companions, while Sarah invests more profoundly in the tangible reality of her students' growth, finding a sense of purpose in shaping external futures rather than salvaging their own. This period sees a bizarre sort of harmony emerge, born not of resolution, but of mutual surrender. They are polite ghosts haunting the same space. Dinners become exercises in conversational triage, where topics are strictly limited to logistics, utility bills, necessary repairs, the mechanics of their social calendar. The deep, probing questions. How are you really feeling? Or, what do you secretly hope for next year? Have been filed away under too dangerous to open. They move around each other with the careful choreography of strangers in an elevator, acutely aware of the other's presence, but utterly barred from true contact.